Hey everyone, I'm Sarah. Welcome to this Chaturanga Dandasana tutorial. I wanted to go over alignment points for Chaturanga, kind of the do's and don'ts, and really focus on the shoulders. Obviously, there's a lot going on in the whole body. It's a very demanding pose and requires a lot of our muscles to be working for us. But because the shoulder joint is inherently unstable and vulnerable, because it's the most mobile joint in the body, I really wanted to focus on how we find more stability and strength in the shoulders so that we can contribute to shoulder health. And since we do it so often, right, we often see it in a yoga class, especially a vinyasa flow class, I want to get those alignment points down so that you can practice it safely and practice it for years to come and keep your shoulders really healthy while doing it. So let's start with the do's and don'ts of Chaturanga Dandasana. So I'm going to show you from the side. You can watch or do this with me. I want to do it seated because obviously it's going to be harder to do if we're in Chaturanga. So just imagine that I'm in the Chaturanga orientation, right? So to mimic the arm position, I'm going to bend the elbows, flip the fingers up toward the ceiling, palms are facing forward. I'm going to get the heels of my hands in line with my elbows, creating that 90-degree shape. Now, what we don't want to do, this is one of the don'ts of Chaturanga, we do not want to dip our shoulder heads too far forward, or rather, when we're lowering down, we don't want to dip them too far toward the ground. Right? A lot of times we see this, where we bring the shoulders into extension, right? And the shoulders go lower than the elbows. This puts a lot of load on the shoulders, which we don't want, okay? So what we want to think about is shoulder heads back, chest broad, right? So when I come into Chaturanga, I'll show you, this is what tends to happen, right? We dip really low toward the ground. We want to keep the head of the shoulders either above the level of the elbows. I'm totally fine with that. That's how I often practice. I'm still getting a lot of good strength in the shoulders. Or have the shoulder heads in line with the elbows. We just don't want to dip them too far below the level of the elbows, okay? So that's one big point. And then the second point is we don't want to flare our elbows too wide. That will cause instability. Right, so to stabilize the shoulders, we want to think about squeezing the elbows in toward the sides of the ribs. It doesn't have to be like this huge exaggerated squeeze, but that's just what we're moving toward, right? Try to keep the elbows close to the sides of the ribs, right? Don't let them go too far from each other. They want to stick together, okay? Now, those are like, I would say the two most important things to think about. Shoulder heads back, elbows into the ribs. What that does is it secures the arm bone, the humerus, to the shoulder socket. And that's what allows the stability in the shoulder joint, okay? So that's really what we're going for here. Now, something to tack on to that. When you do those actions, just notice, you can do this with me now, arms at 90 degrees, pull the head of the shoulders back so you feel the chest widen, hug the elbows in. Now notice if the front of your ribs started to flare forward. Right, almost like you're coming into this back bend. If that's your tendency, I also want you to think of hugging the front ribs in, right? Or knitting the front of the ribs toward each other and back toward the spine, right? So you go from here to here. And there you go. There's your upper body Chaturanga alignment, okay? So let's take it into a modified variation and practice it. So I often do this in my own practice. I'll alternate between knees up Chaturanga and knees down. So for knees down, you're just going to walk your knees back a little bit. So you're not in a true tabletop position. The shoulders are still over the wrists, but the knees walk back a little bit. So you're in a longer tabletop. Shift your weight forward, grip the mat with your fingertips, and then start to bend the elbows back, lower down any amount, just make sure not to lower the head of the shoulders below the elbows. You'll notice that I don't even have my shoulder heads in line with my elbows. They're still lifted, right? I'm still getting a lot of work in the arms and the shoulders. Good. Hug the elbows in toward the sides of the body. Slide the shoulder blades down the back, free up the neck, and then lift your front ribs up into the body. Feel that core engagement. Good. And then press back up to table. and sit back on your heels. Okay, you can do that again with me, or you can watch if that's gonna help you kind of absorb the alignment. So I'm in my modified tabletop pose. With the knees down, that just gives us a little wiggle room to play with the upper body. Maybe it helps you hold just a little bit longer. Shift your weight forward, grip the mat with your fingertips, start to bend the elbows straight back. Now listen, I'm not letting my ribs drop or my pelvis drop. Right? I'm not coming into like this up dog shape. Belly hugs in, tailbone lengthens back. I'm keeping the torso in line and just bending the elbows. Okay, now I'm gonna think of my 3 alignment points. Shoulder heads back, ribs in, and elbows hugging in. Whew, and then I press back up and sit on the heels. I wanna show 2 tips that might be helpful in further working with that alignment. First one is if you have 2 blocks, you can place the blocks toward the top of the mat on their medium setting. That's probably gonna work best for most of us, but you can change that. And then you're gonna place your hands behind the blocks, maybe a little bit off to the side. You can figure this out. Step back to your plank pose. So now we're working toward Chaturanga with the knees up. You're gonna shift your weight forward, bend the elbows, and you're gonna lay the front of the shoulders on the blocks. So notice how the blocks catch the front of the shoulders, and I have some support there. So obviously I can hold this a little bit longer because it's like someone's holding me in my upper body. And then once I'm here, I can work on lower body alignment. I can scoop the tail under, lengthening it toward the heels, and I can zip the belly up. I can firm my thigh muscles, strong legs, lift my chin a little bit so my skull isn't dropping. Okay, and notice here that because of the blocks, they're not allowing my shoulders to dip below my elbows. Right. So that one is really going to help you see that 90-degree angle of the arms. If you want a little extra cushy tip, I love this one. So I'm going to place my bolster vertically on the mat, and then I'm going to frame it coming into that plank pose. So my hands are pretty much just above the top of the bolster. And as I lower down, I'm going to let the bolster catch my pelvis and my belly. Okay, so now I can play with the arms. I might need to walk the hands back so that they're really underneath the elbows. And then I can pull the shoulder heads away from the floor, hug the shoulder blades in toward the spine, broaden the chest, and hug the elbows in toward the sides of the ribs. Right, so because I don't have to do as much, I'm not working that hard, I'm being held here. I can even look at my arms, I can look at my elbows, I can see that everything's aligned, and then I can play with those alignment points. Make sure not to drop the head, lift the chin a little bit, look toward the top of your mat, back of the neck engages. Good, and then you can press back. Maybe do a little restorative with your bolster. And that's that. So one last thing to say is if you're working on kind of getting all of those alignment points, you can also practice it in other poses. It doesn't have to just be in Chaturanga or Chaturanga prep, right? You could even do like a low lunge and do your arm position, work on shoulders back, front ribs in, right? You could do it in crescent pose, and you're just changing the arm variation of the pose so that you can really kind of like reinforce all of those points. So I hope this was helpful. Have fun working on your Chaturanga, whichever variation works for you. There's not one way to do it. You don't have to do it with the knees up. It's really just what is the best variation for your body, and how do you modify so that you can keep the integrity of the alignment, keep your body safe, so that you can do yoga for many years to come. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you in our next class.